Dr. Ana Delgado spent 15 years studying Philippine volcanic systems as isolated geological features. Then she compared seismic data from Mayon's January dome collapse with monitoring records from Taal, Pinatubo and Bulusan, and everything she thought she knew about volcanic science fell apart. The signatures were identical. The timing was synchronized. The pressure patterns matched perfectly across hundreds of kilometers. The Philippines did not have independent volcanic systems. It had been sitting on top of a single massive volcanic superstructure that was finally revealing itself. Delgado's breakthrough analysis shows that major Philippine earthquakes over the past 6 months, the magnitude 6.9 Cebu earthquake and the magnitude 7.4 Davao earthquake, systematically fractured the geological barriers that normally keep volcanic systems separate. Mayon's dome collapse was not an isolated failure. It was the trigger that activated a network of magma chambers connected by newly opened fault pathways. Underground pressure monitoring now shows coordinated magma movement across multiple provinces simultaneously. The implications are staggering. Delgado's mathematical models predict that when one major volcanic system in the Philippines reaches an explosive threshold, the pressure release could cascade through the entire network within hours. Alert level escalations that normally take months could happen in minutes. Evacuation timelines that assume single volcano scenarios become useless when facing coordinated multi-volcano activation. Delgado's classified reports ask the questions that could redefine volcanic hazard planning globally. If the Philippine volcanic arc represents the first documented example of a connected supervolcanic network, how many other archipelago nations are sitting on similar geological time bombs? And when underground magma systems prove to be interconnected across hundreds of kilometers, how do we prevent the next dome collapse from triggering the largest volcanic disaster in human history? For 5 centuries, Mayon Volcano has been a paragon of isolated eruptions. Its 52 recorded explosions since 1616 have all followed a familiar script. Months of gradual dome building, occasional flank collapses, localized destruction. Alert Level 1 would progress to 3 over weeks or months, giving residents ample time to evacuate. Then came January 2026. In just 6 days, Mayon leapt from Alert Level 1 to 3. It was a terrifying acceleration that defied all historical precedent. But it was not just the speed of escalation that shocked scientists. It was what came next. As Mayon's seismometers trembled, Dr. Delgado noticed something impossible. Taal Volcano, 500 kilometers away, was registering the exact same seismic pattern. So was Bulusan, 200 kilometers to the north. Even Pinatubo, silent for 30 years, showed matching harmonic tremors. In a moment of horrified clarity, Delgado realized the truth. These were not isolated volcanoes. They were nodes in a network, connected by a subterranean web of magma and fractured crust, and when one node pulsed, the others answered in unison. The evidence came together like puzzle pieces scattered across the archipelago. Major earthquakes in 2025, a magnitude 6.9 in Cebu and a magnitude 7.4 doublet in Davao had systematically shattered the barriers that kept these volcanic systems isolated. Pressure sensors now revealed magma rushing through the freshly opened conduits, linking chambers across hundreds of kilometers. As Delgado published her findings, the implications sent shockwaves through the geological community. Suddenly, volcanoes that had been studied in isolation for centuries had to be reanalyzed as interconnected threats. A dome collapse at one could trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. Delgado's mathematical models painted a chilling picture. When the pressure at one volcano reaches a critical threshold, it could cascade through the network in a matter of hours. A process that normally takes months could unfold in moments. The evacuation plans designed for single volcanoes would be useless against a multi-volcano catastrophe. These are not hypotheticals. They are the urgent warnings now landing on the desks of emergency planners across the Philippines. Because if Delgado is right, the next major eruption will not come from an isolated peak. It will come from an archipelago spanning supervolcano awakening beneath 100 million people. To understand the scale of this threat, we have to rewind 500,000 years. That is how long Mayon has been erupting, its magma rising from the hellish depths, where the Philippine sea plate grinds beneath the Eurasian crust. Over the eons, those eruptions sculpted an icon, a cone so perfectly symmetrical that it became the global archetype of a stratovolcano. But that beauty came at a price. Mayon's 52 recorded eruptions have claimed over 1,500 lives, burying entire towns in searing ash and debris. The 1814 eruption entombed the village of Cagsawa, leaving only the church tower protruding from the hardened ash. In 1993, pyroclastic flows incinerated hundreds of homes and killed 79 people. Each time, the eruptions followed a similar pattern, a gradual escalation over months. Lava oozing from the summit before flank collapses unleashed localized destruction. But the foundation of that pattern, the idea that each Philippine volcano is an isolated system, has now been shattered. The real story lies in the violent tectonic ballet happening beneath the archipelago. Imagine a network of faults, like a shattered pane of glass, spreading across 1,200 kilometers from Mindanao to Luzon. That is the Philippine fault system, and it has been the puppet master behind the archipelago's volcanic activity for millions of years. Each time the fault network jolts, as it did in 2025 with the magnitude 6.9 Cebu earthquake and the magnitude 7.4 Davao doublet, it is like a seismic lockpick. Faults that once kept magma reservoirs isolated suddenly open, creating conduits that connect chambers across vast distances. It is a phenomenon that has been hidden in plain sight. Scientists have long known that the Philippines sit atop a double-barreled powder keg, the grinding of multiple tectonic plates coupled with 50 active volcanic systems. But they assumed those volcanoes were isolated entities, each with its own eruption rhythm. Dr. Delgado's research shatters that assumption. Her data suggests that when tectonic stresses unlock the right faults, every volcano in the Philippines becomes a potential pressure valve for the others. A magma surge beneath Mayon could rush to Pinatubo in the blink of an eye. A dome collapse at Taal could send shockwaves rippling to Canlaon, 500 kilometers away. Suddenly, the Philippines are not facing 50 individual volcanoes. They are sitting atop a single unified volcanic system with the destructive potential of a supervolcano. If history is any guide, that system is long overdue for a devastating synchronous eruption. As you read this, 200,000 people are fleeing the slopes of Mayon Volcano. But if Dr. Delgado's models are correct, their evacuation is just the beginning of a much larger crisis. Imagine the chaos if Taal Volcano, just 60 kilometers from Manila, suddenly escalates in lockstep with Mayon. That would instantly put over 700,000 people in the potential path of devastating ashfall and destructive lahars. Now picture Pinatubo and Bulusan simultaneously reaching critical thresholds, triggering evacuations across Luzon. In a worst-case scenario, over 15 million people across 6 provinces could require emergency relocation, a mass exodus unparalleled in Philippine history. But this is no ordinary evacuation challenge. It's a multiplayer catastrophe that could bring the entire country to its knees. Consider the aviation network. Even a minor eruption at one of the Philippines' volcanoes is enough to trigger flight restrictions in a 6-kilometer radius. Now imagine a dozen volcanoes erupting in unison, their ash plumes merging into a sky-darkening shroud that grounds every flight from Mindanao to Manila. Some 50 million passengers could find themselves stranded as the ash spreads across Southeast Asia, choking the air corridors that connect the region's economies. Vital shipping lanes would become impassable, paralysing supply chains from the Strait of Malacca to the South China Sea. On the ground, the infrastructure collapse would be swift and brutal. The Philippines relies on geothermal power plants nestled in the shadow of its volcanoes for 40% of its electricity. A single eruption can knock those facilities offline. A coordinated volcanic shutdown could plunge half the country into darkness. Communications networks would falter next as volcanic debris destroys cell towers and severs undersea internet cables. Highways, rails and ports would be crippled by ashfall and lahar flows, stranding millions in a transportation nightmare from hell. Even the water supply would not be spared. The same ashfall that chokes roads and railways would contaminate reservoirs, cutting off drinking water to over 25 million people in the nation's cities. The cascading failure of sanitation systems would quickly follow, unleashing the twin threats of dehydration and disease. Beyond the borders of the Philippines, the ripple effects would be felt across the planet. As a critical hub for electronics manufacturing and business process outsourcing, a prolonged Philippine disaster would send shockwaves through the global economy. The country's overseas workers, who number over 10 million, would find themselves stranded abroad, unable to send vital remittances home. Faced with this multiplicity of crises, the Philippines' emergency response systems would be stretched beyond the breaking point. Evacuation plans designed for single volcanoes would be worse than useless against a dozen simultaneous eruptions. The military, already strained by perennial typhoons and insurgencies, would be overwhelmed by the logistical demands of a mass exodus. And that's just the domestic fallout. A volcanic catastrophe of this scale would instantly become an international humanitarian crisis, with millions of refugees spilling across the region in search of safety. From Indonesia to Vietnam, every nation in Southeast Asia would be forced into a desperate scramble to absorb the human tide. It's a nightmare scenario that the world is utterly unprepared for. And according to Dr. Delgado's research, it's a nightmare that may be inevitable unless we radically rethink everything we thought we knew about volcanic hazards. As you read this, a new age of volcanic monitoring is dawning in the Philippines. Across the archipelago, scientists are scrambling to unravel the hidden connections between the country's once isolated volcanic systems. At the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, 5OLCS, a war room now pulses around the clock with real-time data from every volcanic peak in the country. Seismometers, GPS stations, and gas sensors feed a stream of information to scientists who, until recently, studied each volcano in isolation. Now they are racing to map the magma superhighways that link the underworlds of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. It is a paradigm shift that is drawing experts from around the world. Teams from the United States, Japan, and Italy are descending on the Philippines, bringing cutting-edge monitoring tools and hard-earned lessons from volcanic crises past. There is a sense of urgency in the air, a recognition that the Philippine archipelago may be the key to understanding a new kind of existential threat. At the center of it all is Dr. Ana Delgado, the researcher who first connected the dots between Mayon's eruption and the stirrings of a volcanic network. Her team is now scouring the data for signs of synchronized unrest, tracking pressure waves that could be the harbingers of a catastrophic chain reaction. They're not alone in their quest. From Indonesia's 130 volcanic islands to the magma-laced rift zones of Iceland, scientists are starting to question the long-held assumption that each volcano is a self-contained system. The clues have been there all along, in the strange synchronicity of eruptions at far-flung Alaskan volcanoes, in the pulsing of Italian volcanic fields that mirror the rhythm of distant earthquakes. But it took Mayon's sudden awakening to crystallize the threat. If Dr. Delgado is right, the Philippine archipelago is not just a canary in the coal mine. It is a global alchemist's flask, mixing together all the necessary ingredients for a volcanic catastrophe we have never dared to imagine. The implications are staggering. The tools we have used for centuries to monitor volcanoes, including seismometers that track isolated quakes and gas sensors that sniff for local magma movement, may be woefully inadequate for the task of predicting a networked eruption. The warning signs we have relied on to forecast volcanic behaviour may be drowned out by the chaotic crosstalk of an archipelago-spanning system. Worst of all, the timelines we have always assumed for volcanic crises, the comforting buffer of weeks or months between the first tremors and the catastrophic blast, may be a deadly illusion. In a world where volcanoes are interconnected, a single dome collapse could trigger a hemisphere-scale eruption in a matter of hours. We are not ready for that world, but thanks to the work of scientists like Dr. Delgado, we are starting to glimpse its outlines. And what we are seeing is a planet where the solid ground beneath our feet is far more fragile than we ever dared to imagine. The next Mayon, the next Pinatubo, the next Krakatoa, they may not be isolated catastrophes. They may be the opening salvos in a global volcanic awakening. The only question is whether we will have the wisdom to heed the warning before the next chain reaction begins. Subscribe now for the latest updates on this existential threat, and the scientists racing to understand it. How vulnerable is your country to a volcanic network eruption? Let us know in the comments. And don't miss our next investigation into the volcanoes that could be the first dominoes to fall.